Welcome to the Thrift Creeper Show. Welcome to the Thrift Creeper Show. I am the Thrift Creeper. I purchase knickknacks from thrift shops, turn them into things like this, and then sneak them back in. Over the last couple years, I've been asked, "Hey, Thrift Creeper, how do you make your pieces? What kind of materials do you use? What kind of clay? What kind of paint? Why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people?" I'm going to answer all of those questions today, right here, just for you and everybody else on YouTube. But this video will not contain any jokes, no humor. This video is for educational purposes only. Roll the intro. Alright, when it comes to getting a piece, usually I go for something that's porcelain or ceramic. You really don't want to put plastic in the oven unless you want emphysema. So if you do want emphysema, then definitely get some plastic. Besides the piece itself, there are other materials that you'll need for this. Those include Dremel tool bits, wire cutters, pliers, armature wire, rubbing alcohol, pasta maker, epoxy sculpt, part A and part B, respirator, tinfoil, preferably recycled tinfoil, medium Sculpey, and then we got a little bit of liquid Sculpey, some Sculpey gloss, and last but not least, some Sculpey softener, sculpting tools, safety glasses, cheap paintbrushes, gloves, safety gloves, ink, UV resin with a black light, paper towels, sanding blocks, saran wrap, wine, but most importantly, a can-do attitude. First things first, safety first. For cutting pieces, I use a Dremel tool with diamond cutting drill bits. One of the bits is used for cutting off bigger portions, and then the other bit is used for sanding things down so I don't cut myself when I'm actually sculpting. Now that everything is cut, we'll add a little bit of armature wire, which keeps it stable, prevents it from breaking in the middle. It really keeps everything sturdy and in one piece. Polymer clay really shouldn't be thicker than 1/4 of an inch, otherwise it'll crack. So you want to bulk out the shape with as much tinfoil as you can. Once it's bulked out in tinfoil and you have a shape, it's time for some epoxy sculpt. But wait, you say, what is epoxy sculpt? Well, just give me a second and I'll tell you, chill out. Epoxy sculpt is essentially a form of clay that hardens chemically when mixing part A and part B into one part, which I call AB. I like to use gloves whenever handling epoxy sculpt. I don't think it's really hazardous or toxic, but I don't want it to cause any brain damage, so Polymer clay doesn't like to stick to epoxy sculpt very well, so it's best to add a little texture before you put on the polymer clay. That just ensures that it gets in all the crevices and it sticks. Now that the epoxy sculpt is done, we're going to add the actual clay, which is polymer clay. I use Sculpey Medium. It's a really good texture, easy to use, not too hard, not too soft. Polymer clay is really hard when you take it out of the package, so it's best to knead it until it's soft. I have a personal trainer, Fabrizio, who just focuses on my hands, so really easy for me to soften the clay. But if you don't have a personal trainer named Fabrizio, you can use a pasta maker, which will soften it. You can also use liquid Sculpey and Sculpey softener. That will, when mixed in, make it a little bit more softer and easy to work with. Once everything's nice and soft, we're going to slowly add on the polymer clay, little thin slice by thin slice. So now I want to make some tentacles for this little guy. So I'm going to wrap armature wire around this sculpting tool. And once that's done, I'll add the epoxy sculpt, just like before, just to this. And then I'll add the polymer clay as well. Now that the epoxy sculpt is done and the polymer clay is on, I can add little details like wrinkles, other textures, crevices. Then I will stick those into the piece and I will add more epoxy sculpt. So it's a lot of going back and forth between epoxy sculpt and polymer clay if you want to add pieces to it, as you really want to make it stable. You don't want these things breaking off the main piece. This is fairly self-explanatory. It's a butt. I like to add butts to all my pieces, probably because I don't have them myself, so I like to live through my pieces. It's really sad. For eyeballs, I have little balls that I've already pre-cooked, so they're already hard, and I'll just stick those into the piece. It's easier that way. I don't have to worry about texture messing up. As far as sculpting tools, I really like dental tools, oddly enough. There's a whole variety of them, and they're super handy. They can get in all the crevices. They're really good at blending. For wrinkles, I just roll out a ball of clay into a little strip, add it, and then blend it first with the dental tool, and then blend it in a little bit more with a softer tip tool. To smooth things out and remove fingerprints and whatnot, I like to use rubbing alcohol. I like to use rubbing alcohol. Now it's texture time. A piece is only as good as the little details, so to add texture, I like to first apply some saran wrap, stick it on there, and make sure it's flush with the clay. Then I take a sharp pointed tool and slowly just tap into it for every little wrinkle or every little pore, whatever you're trying to do. Just wanted to make sure you're still paying attention. Time to cook the piece. So there are instructions on the back of polymer clay packages, but I don't find them reliable. So when it comes to cooking pieces, I would do the following. 225 degrees for 3 hours, and then turn that down to 170 for another 3 hours, and then you're going to let that bad boy cool overnight. Unfortunately, the clay gods are cruel f***ers, so if you find any cracks, just fill them in with epoxy sculpt, and then you could sand that down. That usually hides them pretty well. Before moving on, I'd like to thank the sponsor for today's video. Time for the painting. I like to use cheap acrylic, really whatever's cheap. You don't want to break the bank. After all, you want to save your money as much as possible for things like drugs and prostitutes, things like that.
You want to start by adding
by adding thin layers to the
Sorry about that. You want to start by adding thin layers of paint to the piece. Once you have a good base layer, you can start dry brushing. Things you need for dry brushing: paper towels and dry brushes. And by dry brushes, I mean really any kind of paintbrush that has a rounded tip at the end. Dry brushing is pretty simple. You get a lighter color, you dip your paintbrush into it, and then wipe as much as you can off into a paper towel, and then apply it. When applying it to the piece, you want to go against the grain. So any wrinkles, any crevices, you want to go against those. Just like me during puberty, I like all of my pieces to be covered in spots and blemishes, things like that. So for that, I will use ink. This is important. Whenever flicking on paint, you want to make sure your brush has very tight bristles. You don't want it to be loose or floppy, like your mom. Mix the ink with a little water, and then you're going to want to flick that on about 5 inches away from the piece. Take your time. It's very subtle, but it'll build up pretty quick. Once those are done, you can start painting little appendages like these tentacles, putting a little detail into everything like the eyeballs, whatever. So how do you prevent paint from scratching off? You use a protective coat. This can be a spray paint or other mediums. I really like this one from Culture Hustle. It has a little bit of a gloss, so it makes it a little bit more lifelike. That said, some things on your piece, like eyeballs, tentacles, might want a little extra gloss. So for that, I use Sculpting gloss. I suggest applying it with a disposable brush. Just a really cheap brush, because after using the gloss it will harden it to the point where you can't use it ever again. I really like adding saliva to pieces, so for that you have two options. You can either have somebody with a chest cold spit on it, or you can use UV resin. UV resin is really cool. You will just drip a little bit onto a stick or something like that and shine a black light on it, and it will cure right before your eyes. Wow, look at that. We did it. I mean, I did this one, but maybe you did something too while you were watching. If you did, send me a picture. I'd love to see it. If you didn't, don't send me a picture. Especially don't send me a picture of your kids. It's the fucking worst. Anyway, hope you liked the video. Maybe I'll do another one. I don't know. Like and subscribe, I guess. I don't really care. I mean, maybe I do, deep down. Deep down, I just really want to be loved, you know? Just like everybody. Holy shit.